not great. All right, looks like we're off to a smashing start. So let's start that again, as my mic was not apparently working there. Welcome to the CFB Super Show, brought to you by the world famous FTN Network. I'm your host, Waddell, aka Deuce85, and we've got sound, we've got video, we've actually got like the most quality video that I've had in quite some time using a different camera. The only issue is I'm in the middle of doing a studio setup. I'm trying to make myself like, you know, Meanie and Quan and all these real sharp guys out here who just, they have these amazing setups. My setup, not so great. So what I'm doing is turning my garage, part of it, worked it out with the missus and the family, into a studio. So I have this temporary background behind me. I know it's not great. I actually have some really cool stuff coming. Hopefully by the next show, you guys will see my new background, which is I'm really excited about. Doing some soundproofing stuff, doing like all this like additional things to make the you know, by the end of August, by week 0, having just complete and total overhaul of my equipment, my production, my you know, quality of show, both visually and you know, audibly. I think the camera right now is amazing. I'm a little bit concerned that my voice or my audio isn't so great, so I apologize in advance if that is happening. Have new lighting, have all this stuff going on. But, you know, one thing that's not going to change is the amazing information that I will continue to provide you and hope that you find to be very helpful. Let me just, amazing information that I will continue to provide you and hope that you find, it doesn't sound too bad. It doesn't sound too bad. You know, I'm good with it. I mean, it definitely could sound better. But I'm good with it. I'm good with it right now. All right, so let me just do a couple of things here, you know, fashionably in the Deuce style here. Just got to get some stuff plugged in, charged here, fixed up. All right, so what I was going to do this week was talk to you about the Big Ten Conference. However, I wanted to just kind of zag a little bit and shift away from that and cover the Big Ten preview next week. Instead, I really wanted to utilize, especially since this was a different setup for me and I wasn't too sure how it was even going to work. I was a little bit concerned about that. So what I'm going to do instead is still talk to you about college football, but we're going to go through the transfer portal, kind of like what we did in the college basketball shows this past couple of months. I'm going to go through the different positions, obviously offensively, that's what we care about here for DFS purposes, and kind of talk about the top transfers, what school they're going to now and how they fit into that offense, and if they're going to be a DFS viable or a you know, fantasy viable in general, or even betting props, all that stuff type of viable player. So we're going to try that. We're going to go through and highlight some really key changes that you're going to want to definitely know. And there's going to be some prop betting opportunities in these offenses for some of these guys. There's going to be, you know, numbers that Jake and myself and a few others, we brought in a lot of smart minds into FTN recently that know about college football a great deal from a betting standpoint. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities here for us to, you know, bet players on their new teams, whether that's over and under, and really study that and listen to a lot of sharp people there. So I'm pretty excited about that for sure. So let's jump into it. Let's talk about quarterback. Let me promise you guys, once we're all set, right, and good to go, we're gonna be on cruise control. We're gonna have our studio set up amazing, and everything is going to be fantastic. So I appreciate all of you who bear with me on this journey that we're on here. There we are. All right, so let's start at quarterback. There's a ton of changes at quarterback that are definitely relevant and we're going to want to pay attention to. The first being Sam Hartman of Wake Forest. It seems like, man, should he have any eligibility left? No, he really shouldn't, but he does. Sam Hartman going into the transfer portal and heading to Notre Dame. So he's going to be the quarterback of the Irish. That's a relatively big one. Looking at Sam Hartman, when healthy, he's put up some of the better numbers in college football. You look at the 2021 season when he threw for almost 4,300 yards, 39 touchdowns. just under 15 interceptions, completion rate of about 60%, just okay. But this past season, coming into this 2022 year, it was thought that he was going to miss time. People that hit his over props were feeling bad. Really didn't end up missing the time that we thought. Still played 12 games, threw for 3,700 yards in those 12 games compared to the 14 games the year prior. 38 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. So he plays 2 less games, threw 1 less touchdown, 2 less interceptions, and a completion percentage of almost 64%. So definitely some good stuff there from Sam Hartman. Played really, really well. As far as his rushing ability, he rushed for 364 yards in 2021. Not the biggest thing, but he did have 117 carries, 11 touchdowns. Didn't rush as much last year, only 129 yards, 1 touchdown, but definitely has that ability. And going into a team like Notre Dame that historically has a very strong offensive line that'll be able to keep Hartman upright, we're looking at a guy here who's going to have a phenomenal season. There's no doubt in my mind about that. And when you look at Notre Dame, let's pull up their depth chart real quick. So he's going to have weapons. They're moving Chris Tyree to the slot, which I actually like a lot because Tyree, he's been around a while. He's been the second fiddle. He's been the third fiddle. Hell, he's even been the fourth fiddle in this Notre Dame offense. They're bringing in, a pretty strong running back group here. Devin Ford of Penn State, he transfers in. He's like the RB3 on this roster, right? Audric Estimi's probably the RB1. They have that redshirt freshman by the name of Jadarian Price, who looks pretty solid. Redshirt freshman by the name of Jabrian Payne, who looks pretty solid. So it made sense to move Chris Tyree over because they don't necessarily have the strongest receiver room here that they have habitually had over the last couple of years. So I like this for Tyree. He can bust down the field. He can score anytime he touches the ball. Working on the slot, I do expect Tyree to be a big-time fantasy option for us. And with Hartman throwing the ball, I'm looking for him to get, double-digit targets at times. Really honestly believe that. The rest of the receiver room, Jaden Thomas, Tobias Merriweather. They do have freshman Rico Flores, KK Smith, Braylon James, a lot of new faces there, so we'll see. But Sam Hartman at the QB spot, and a running back that's obviously going to be very, very good in Audric Estime, who I think is going to be a top-flight RB. So this offense will be just fine. Another quarterback moving on, Brennan Armstrong goes from Virginia to NC State, an intra-conference transfer there. Brennan Armstrong, man, he has been a DFS enigma of sorts over the last couple of years. 2 years ago, we could rely on him game in and game out, underpriced, would come through, threw a million times in that offense 2 years ago, could run better than any other quarterback out there. For 3 years in a row, he's rushed for over 250 yards, 5+ touchdowns. So he has that part of his game. But the offense was just handcuffed last year. Different coaching staff on the offensive side of things. He goes from, in 2021, throwing for almost 4,500 yards, 31 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. We're talking about a major QB option here, 9K plus type of production, right? Last year, in one less game, he throws for 2,200 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 12 INTs. More interceptions than touchdowns. That's horrific. He did run for 338 yards, but he had, hold on, let me pull it up. He did run for 123 yards, 6 touchdowns. So he still scored some touchdowns, had less yardage on the running side of things. Again, 552 yards 2 years ago, 5 touchdowns. He had 9 touchdowns in 2021 in that video game-esque offense, and then he rushes for 6 touchdowns last year. So certainly handcuffed. Now he's going to be turned loose a little bit more in this NC State offense. Definitely going to be talking about Brennan Armstrong a lot more this year on the Wolfpack roster. It's going to be a situation where if we come into it and he's priced at 2022 numbers, what was he, like 6'5", 7K, and it was like, wow, how can I not roster Brennan Armstrong? And then we're watching him struggle to get even 10 fantasy points at that price. And it's like, okay, we can't keep rostering him. We can't keep doing this. I think people are going to be, having that bad taste in their mouth, that memory of Armstrong, playing pretty horrifically at times. And truthfully, no fault of his own. That offense was just so horrible. But we're looking at a guy here at NC State where he's going to be able to throw the ball more. He's going to be able to do some more things. He's going to be able to return to that form that we're accustomed to seeing from him and what we saw 2-3 years ago. Looking at their depth chart, at running back, Jordan Houston there, Michael Allen. They have a freshman by the name of Kendrick Raphael. That's always going to be a decent group for them anyways, the way they play. And then you look at it, their offensive weapons. They have Trent Penix back at tight end. They do have Porter Rooks, who is somebody who's been getting a little bit of hype, Terrell Timmons, and Keon Lasane. Now, there's not a lot of big names here. We're going to have an opportunity to really learn these guys and see who Armstrong builds an early rapport with and be able to jump out in front. But I think it's going to be, at least for me, a lot of naked Brennan Armstrong type of lineups there early on. All right, Devin Leary going from NC State. He gets replaced by Brennan Armstrong, heading to Kentucky. Now, Devin Leary, man, that's one of our dudes. Devin Leary didn't get the respect that he probably deserved quite often. Honestly, he didn't get any respect from the industry. Habitually low owned all the time. You see in 2021, 3,500 yards, 35 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Obviously, he was only able to play in the 6 games there last season. 1,200 yards, 11 touchdowns, 4 INTs. Would have certainly been an opportunity to mirror the year prior number had he played a full season. Scored 3 rushing touchdowns. We're not going to be getting a whole lot from him there, but I certainly like Leary on the Kentucky side of things. And looking at it, Kentucky, man, they might not be a basketball school for much longer. It depends on how, old Coach Cal's going to do with that roster. I know he just got Trey Mitchell and everything, but they could be a football school. This Kentucky team, man, they're pretty solid. Ramon Davis, Ray Davis, if you will, comes over after transferring from Vanderbilt via Temple. Jusane McClain is the backup, who I still like quite a bit. Ramon Jefferson, who is a solid upperclassman. And then you look at it at tight end, Jordan Dingle, he's going to be very good. Josh Caddis, he's going to be solid. At the wide receiver position, Dane Key, everybody was hyping Dane Key to the moon. Darion Brown, he is in his second year as well as a sophomore. Didn't get the same hype that Key got coming into the season, but I think coming out of last season, a lot of people will tell you Darion Brown is the dude, and he looks a lot stronger and looks like he's headed for that WR1 spot here. And they still have our guy, Tavion Robinson. They are absolutely loaded in the receiver room. There's no way Devin Leary won't produce at a high level with this group. They have some strong freshmen coming in. There's a lot to like about this Kentucky offense. So I'm definitely on board and certainly a fan of what Devin Leary is going to be able to do this season. There's definitely a lot to like there. All right, moving right along here. We talked about it last week in the Pac-12 conference breakdown. DJ Ugalele coming from Clemson to Oregon State. I think he's going to have the opportunity to do a lot of things. Oregon State, the receiver room is okay, but he's going to be able to run. He has a world-class running back room at his disposal. He's going to be very solid. There's no doubt in my mind. Tanner Mordecai transferring from SMU to Wisconsin. Wisconsin's going to open things up. We're going to talk more in depth about it next week on the Big Ten preview show. Wisconsin is definitely going to be throwing the ball more. They have different coaching staff in there. There's a lot to like about this Wisconsin football program. This is another one where I think people are going to be used to, fading them, ignoring them. Wisconsin's on the slate. All we can really worry about rostering is Braylon Allen. And right now, because they can't do anything else, Allen can't find room to run, yada, yada, yada. It's not just going to be about rostering Braylon Allen or sometimes Chez Malusi. Like, that running back room's still going to be solid, obviously, but let's look at what Tanner Mordecai comes in here and who he's going to have to throw the ball to. Chimere DK is back. DK is got breakout potential. We've already seen him. He's not quite a household name yet, but people that watch a lot of football, follow the program, follow Big Ten, know DK can do a lot of damage. They do have CJ Williams coming in, who is a transfer from USC. He's a young kid, so he's going to be able to do some damage there in this offense as well. Will Pauling transfers in from Cincinnati, another young kid, sophomore. So they have a really young group here with DK, the upperclassman. Skylar Bell is back, who I actually personally really like. I think Skylar Bell, I kind of hyped him to the moon last year. Had his games here or there, right? I think people are going to quickly forget about him, and we're going to have the opportunity for him to come into the season cheap. A lot of people, going to DK or CJ Williams is getting a lot of this hype. And you also have Bryson Green coming in, who's a transfer from Oklahoma State. So this Wisconsin receiver room has 2 key returners, plus they add 3 or 4 transfers that are certainly going to contribute right away. And we already know Tanner Mordecai can throw. You throw that football over the mountains. I mean, honestly, Tanner Mordecai is a absolute fantasy stud. There's just really no way that he doesn't perform. I think it's going to be a big time edge early on. Like I said, people are going to look at, Brennan Armstrong. He hurt us. We're not going to use him. We're going to have that edge. And then Wisconsin's offense. So we're going to run to the running backs, even though in those first couple games, we may see them throw it an excessive amount of times, and Tanner Mordecai being able to facilitate this offense and turn out quite a bit of DFS fantasy-friendly games. Sam Jackson is going from TCU to Cal. We talked about him last week. Certainly is an intriguing option. I like the versatility that he has. I'm really, really intrigued by him. Brady Allen transfers from Purdue to Louisville. Hudson Card from Texas to Purdue. So Hudson Card, losing his gig, but going to get an opportunity to play that Aiden O'Connell role for Purdue. We know their offense churns out a lot of fantasy-friendly goodness, so I am definitely looking at Hudson Card to see what he can do. Shedeur Sanders from Jackson State follows his dad to Colorado. We know he's going to get the starting gig. We talked about him at length last year. Taven Jackson transfers from Tennessee to Indiana, where I think he'll get the opportunity to play a lot. We'll talk about him more in depth next week. Phil Jerkovich, the jerk store, transferring from Boston College to Pittsburgh. I don't think we need to sleep on Pittsburgh by any means. They go from Kadon Slovis to Phil Jerkovich. Some people think that maybe there's going to be a drop-off in production. I don't know about that. When Jerk's healthy, he's pretty damn good. He's been one of the better, I'd personally say, quarterbacks in the conference the last couple of years when healthy. Now, he hasn't been healthy a ton, but when he's out there, man, he's putting up some fantasy-friendly games, and I think that's another thing that people have quickly forgotten about, just how good the jerk store can be. He has Rodney Hammonds, Sibo Flemister in the running back game, so those are their 2 guys. LSU transfer Derek Davis, so they do have a pretty solid running back room there behind him in case, God forbid, injuries happen, ineffectiveness happens, any of that. They also bring in Christian Valou, a Penn State transfer at quarterback, to be the backup. I really like Valou. I actually wanted him to win the Penn State gig before, obviously, plans changed. I really like him in short work. He has looked like a solid QB2 in a main team lineup, QB 15 type guy overall. I really like him. I'm probably the only one in the industry that likes him, but I'm definitely keeping an eye on him. Knowing what Jerk's history is with injuries, he could be getting the call sooner rather than later. In the receiver room, Kanata Mumpfield, that's my boy. That's my guy. Bub means he's strong, touchdown machine. They do have some freshmen coming in, Lamar Seymour, Israel Polk, Zion Flowers, lots of youth being infused here. A transfer from Florida by the name of Dejon Reynolds. So the receiver room will be good and will be solid here for the jerk store. Kadon Slovis going to BYU from Pitt. I think Slovis, he's had a weird career. He went from relatively unknown to you could never fade him to all this hype coming into it from USC to Pittsburgh. Like, hey, he's finally going to get the opportunity. Can he reel it back in? Can he invigorate himself? Can he put up the numbers that he had in 2019 when he threw for 3,500 yards, 30 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, 72% percentage completion rate as a freshman in 12 games? Like, where's that Slovis at? And he really hasn't been able to find that level of success since. So getting a change of course here, going to BYU after a pretty lackluster season, I'd say, at Pitt. For me, I'm disappointed. 10 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, 2,300 yards. Like, that wasn't the season I expected at all. Now, granted, Evan Kanata, they had some ridiculous running games, but still, Slovis had opportunity after opportunity to really perform, and he just didn't do it. So I'm a little bit hesitant here. Looking at the depth chart for BYU, let's pull that up. They have a phenomenal receiver room still. In the last couple of years, we've seen the BYU quarterback, whoever that might be, really be a top-flight fantasy option. So perhaps Slovis can turn himself back into that 2019 form. You look at what he has around him, UNLV transfer, Aiden Robbins, we'll talk about during the RB section. Obviously coming into it, upperclassman, he's going to get the rock a ton, an absolute metric S ton. They also have Hinckley Rapati coming back, a Colorado transfer by the name of Deion Smith coming back or transferring over. So they have a solid group of running backs. Isaac Rex, the touchdown machine, is there at tight end. Mason Wake, healthy as can be. And then at wide receiver, Chase Roberts, Keanu Hill, Cody Epps, Parker Kingston. Those are all names you're likely familiar with. Keanu Hill was a kind of a, they all had their moments, like Chase Roberts early on, Keanu Hill in the middle part of the season. And then we were getting a lot out of Cody Epps there to end the season as well. So I'm pretty interested in that. They also bring in some transfers here. Darius Lassiter, who transfers in from Eastern Michigan at a community college. He was a guy that was kind of sneaky on max slates, scored some touchdowns, playing, video game-esque type offenses. So we'll see if he can kind of, work his way up there into the top 3 conversation. And then also Keelan Marion, a transfer from UConn, comes into the BYU receiver room. So that is what they're working with there. Other notable quarterbacks, Spencer Sanders going from Oklahoma State to Ole Miss. That's clearly interesting. Ole Miss offense has, over the last couple of years, defensively, it hasn't been great, but offensively, they've been one of the more stackable offenses for DFS and fantasy and prop betting purposes. So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing Spencer Sanders excel in an Ole Miss, uniform here. Looking at it, let's pull this up. The Rebels depth chart has some gas. Now, obviously, Jackson Dart's there, so it's no guarantee that Spencer Sanders just usurps him, but it's a good, competition to have. And Dart, something happens, or, I just feel like Sanders, regardless of who wins that gig, like Sanders is going to play, right? He's going to get some snaps. Running back room is strong as ever. Quinshawn Judkins, my God, what an absolute stud. Ulysses Bentley. And then you look at the receiver room, Jordan Watkins, who transferred last year. I certainly like him. Jalen Knox, Dayton Wade. These are all guys that I certainly am looking at and like. But the big names, the transfers, Zachary Franklin from arguably the best receiver room in all of college football last year, UTSA. Zachary Franklin was an absolute machine of a pass catcher. And it was crazy because they had 3 guys on UTSA that were just absolute animals, and they all paid off constantly. And then Trey Harris, who is a transfer from Louisiana Tech, highly, highly productive. I'm a little bit nervous because we've seen some high-profile guys transfer into Ole Miss as receivers and not work out. So while this Ole Miss offense is amazing, it's fun, it's got some real live weapons. Caden Priestcorn is coming in to play tight end. Michael Trigg is back, of course. Priestcorn was my dude from Memphis last year, a touchdown equity machine. This offense is great, but it might be a case of too many mouths to feed. It might be a case of, no continuity, and we could be looking at some situations where we're just downright annoyed with the fact that nobody's consistently performing. Other transfers, Peyton Thorne transfers from Michigan State to Auburn. I'm not too excited about that one. Jeff Sims from Georgia Tech to Nebraska. I think Sims could have a really nice season there in Nebraska. Looking forward to seeing him play there. Chance Nolan transfers to TCU, where he'll likely back up. Ben Bryant from Cincy to Northwestern. Now, I like this Northwestern team. Really, really more than your average Bear. I think I'm going to be one of the few that actually talks up this Northwestern offense, and I don't know what it is about them. I constantly tried to last year, find us a Northwestern wide receiver to utilize and really, kind of be sneaky with, and it didn't pan out all that well. But you look at their offense, they've got Cam Porter there back at running back, Ben Bryant, who play quarterback. I think Northwestern, reading in reports, they're going to throw the ball more. They got AJ Henning coming in from Michigan, who's a real certifiable weapon. Michigan just had too many of them, but AJ Henning, I think he can really do some serious damage in this Northwestern offense. I'm very high on Henning. He's an upperclassman. There's not a ton of ceiling there, but I think he's going to do some damage. And then Cam Johnson, who they bring in, who, by way of Vanderbilt and ASU, really, really productive at Vanderbilt, not so much at ASU, as much as he was there. Those two coming in, it just gives a nice lift to the Northwestern offense, which I think will be far less one-dimensional than we saw last year. So I'm low-key, maybe high-key, if you will, on this Northwestern train. I'm feeling pretty good about them, honestly. Graham Mertz goes from Wisconsin to Florida. We'll see. He's going to have to prove it. It's going to be an offense where he can throw the ball more. We'll see. Casey Thompson goes from Nebraska, where Jeff Sims will go, to FAU. I think Casey Thompson will have a really big season statistically there at FAU, so I am looking forward to that. We know Colin Schlee went to UCLA from Kent State. We talked a bit about that last show. Tyler Buchner from Notre Dame to Alabama. And then any others, Drew Pine from Notre Dame to ASU. We talked a bit about that. Jack Plummer from Cal to the Bill. Donovan Smith from Texas Tech to Houston. Luke Altmaier from Ole Miss to Illinois. And then Hank Bachmeier goes from Boise State to Louisiana Tech, where I think he will actually play pretty decently there. Other guys, JT Daniels from West Virginia to Rice. Haynes King from Texas A&M to Georgia Tech. My man Sam Heward goes from UW to Cal Poly. Just wasn't going to work out with Penix around for him. And then Ben Finley goes from NC State to Cal, which we talked a little bit about last week as well. All right, so let's move on to running back transfers that you want to know. And I'm really, really excited about my background coming, guys. Like, I can't even begin to tell you. And what's going to be fun about this is, if it's a CFB version of the Super Show, I have a background for that. If it's a CBB version of the Super Show, I have a completely different background for that. And it's not just going to be like a digital background, or the producers of on FTN are world class, smart as hell. They do awesome graphics. But I'm gonna have a legit banner in the back, and I just can't wait. I can't wait, guys. Can't wait. Can't wait. So, we're using the summer to fine-tune things, get the show running. By week 0, we're going to be so professional around here. Won't even be able to stand it. I'll have a fresh cut. I'll have the fade going on. I'll have the beard trimmed up. We'll have Jake here or some other special guests co-hosting this season. It's going to be awesome, baby. All right. At running back, Carson Steele, transferring from Ball State to UCLA. We talked about him at length last week. Keep wanting to say last year. He's going to be a workhorse back there. Certainly going to be DFS viable. Now, Florida State, they have last year they had several productive running backs, a bit of a crowded situation. Trey Benson's getting a lot of hype this year for Florida State. Sean Ward, who was there with him, his backfield mate, heading over to Kansas State, where he's hoping to capture some of that Deuce Vaughn mojo. Deuce Vaughn's off to the NFL. Treshaun Ward comes in, a similar build. Could Treshaun Ward be the next Deuce Vaughn? Could Treshaun Ward be getting loose like Deuce did? We'll have to see. I certainly liked his opportunity. Marshawn Lloyd going from South Carolina to USC. He'll be depth there. He'll have his day, but it's going to be tough to use him on any consistent basis. Brian Battie transfers from South Florida to Auburn. Battie's really productive. He's not like super flashy, but he can get things done depending on the workload. Ramon Davis from Vanderbilt to Kentucky. Yes, please. I love Ramon Davis. Ramon Davis is just like a bowling ball. Really, really like him. Think he's going to do great at Kentucky. I'm high on this Kentucky team. By the way, if ever there was a weird situation where like basketball, I am very, very like Kentucky. Not about it. But Kentucky football, I'm about it. And I've been about it for a while. Lynn Bowden a couple years ago, just dropping that 70 piece on Virginia Tech. Yes, please. I love this Kentucky football program. Blake Watson goes from ODU to Memphis. I like that. Although Memphis, it's tough for me to get excited about their running backs because they have some names come in there, and then the consistency just isn't there, and then they end up going back to a fullback or their RB3 anyway. So I really want to see Blake Watson get it done. He has the talent, the ability. There's no doubt in my mind, but the program, philosophy, offense, I got to see it first. Sean Tyler goes from Western Michigan to Minnesota. He's not going to be Mo Ibrahim by any stretch of the imagination, but Sean Tyler can catch out of the backfield. Sean Tyler can handle heavy carries. Sean Tyler can put up video game numbers. He doesn't get enough hype. He's going to be very, very good in that Minnesota offense. Matter of fact, let's pull up Minnesota's projected depth chart. All of these are projected depth charts, okay? Don't hold me to them. Now, at quarterback, it's a little bit unexciting. So we'll see what happens there. We will talk more in depth about that next week on the Big Ten show. But Sean Tyler, looking at this backfield, Zach Evans, Bryce Williams, we saw a little bit of last year, freshman coming in, Darius Tyler. It's Sean Tyler, baby. Sean Tyler's going to get some work. He is going to get some work. There's just no doubt about it. They're going to use him in a multitude of ways. They bring in another Maction player at wide receiver from Western Michigan. They pilfered that school, Corey Crooms. So they have a bona fide stud type wide receiver coming in. Chris Ottman-Bell's back. Daniel Jackson's back. They do have Elijah Spencer coming in, who was really, really good at Charlotte. So this receiver room for Minnesota is definitely taking a step forward. And the running back situation, while taking a step backwards, still has a very fun running back in Sean Tyler coming in. Trey Sanders, who I really wanted to get more work at Alabama, and I really felt like he had the the talent, the upside, the skill set to absolutely dominate. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for him in Alabama. He is headed to TCU. Could he do some damage at TCU? I think so. I think so for sure. Dylan Johnson transferring from Mississippi State to Washington. I love it. I think, Washington, talked about it last week, their running back room, it tends to be deep. They do like to use their running backs. Dylan Johnson is going to have games. It's going to be completely price dependent for me for these Washington running backs. Dylan Johnson at 8K is a very easy fade, but if he comes into a slate at like 5-2 or it's a late night slate and he gets up to like 6K, I could see it because he's going to catch some passes. He's going to get to work. He has that opportunity to pay it off. He's just not going to be a bell cow running back. And I think most of us at this point understand that. Day Hunter, my man, Day Hunter. Got to see where he goes. He's leaving Liberty, so we'll see what happens. Just be aware that Day Hunter's out there, and he's still young. He's still very young, redshirt sophomore. Nathan Carter goes from UConn to Michigan State. That's sort of interesting. Nathan Carter has definitely, talent. LJ Johnson goes from Texas A&M to SMU, just what SMU needed. Let's pull up this real quick. No Tanner Mordecai. Let's pull up this SMU depth chart right quick, okay? So Preston Stone is going to probably be the quarterback, right? Preston Stone, and that's fine. I think Preston Stone is young enough to be able to take this up. They have Alex Padilla transferring from Iowa, the offensive juggernaut that Iowa is, so maybe he'll push Preston Stone. You look at it, though, the running back situation from SMU, if you thought the running back room was frustrating last year for SMU, and I had to stop and come into this, it's going to be even worse this year. Kamar Wheaton, who I think most of us love and want him to be a bell cow back, maybe I'm speaking for myself only, I want Kamar Wheaton. I want the season of Kamar Wheaton. Tyler Levine, Vilton Gardner. Like, this running back room already had names in it, right? LJ Johnson transferring from Texas A&M. Clearly, he's going to have to play. He's not transferring in not to play. Jalen Knighton transferring in as I believe a grad transfer from Miami. Knighton had, some big games over the last couple of years. No consistency, had some health issues, but the guy's strong. Can run really well, can catch some passes. What is SMU trying to do to the DFS community with this running back room? Because it somehow got even more crowded than last year. I don't know. I had to harp on that for a minute. Jake Bailey, Jordan Curley back, Moochie Dixon, Roderick Daniels, the really good receiver room here again. Jordan Hudson comes over from TCU to be in the receiver room as well. Keyshawn Smith transfers over from Miami. You guys remember him as a value piece last year. And then Romello Brinson transfers in, another Miami transfer, lesser used, lesser known. So some names there, but man, SMU running backs. And you just know they're going to be like there's going to be an SMU back who scores 2 touchdowns the week before. He's priced at 3.5, and everybody's going to be like, "Oh, you got to roster this guy, man. Like, you just have to roster this 3.5 SMU running back. You know, you just have to." And then I'm going to be sitting here like, am I in the twilight zone again? There are 4 other guys getting carries in this backfield. I understand he's 3.5, but there's 4 other guys getting carries in this backfield. We're going to need injuries, God forbid, or I don't know. This SMU running back room is not the play, guys. Keziah Holmes transferred from Penn State to Florida State. Florida State just upping their depth there when they lose Treshaun Ward. Kobe Pace goes from Clemson to Virginia. Kobe Pace definitely showed an ability to, be the primary RB1 at times for Clemson. He certainly has been around the program, with big names and kind of waited his turn. He had 641 yards there in 2021, 6 touchdowns, 131 receiving yards. Had 3 touchdowns last year, but 8 games, clearly just fell behind. And, health be damned. I think Kobe can be productive for Virginia. Alton McCaskill goes to Colorado from Houston. Talked at length about him. He's going to be a stud. Marquez Cooper goes from Kent State to Ball State, so he stays in the action. I love Marquez Cooper. I love rostering him. He gets to go to Ball State, where he'll get to play in the Carson Steele role, which is basically just, he'll be a heavy usage guy there. We already talked about Jalen Knighton going over. Cameron Scatabo from Sac State to ASU. Talked about him at length last week. I love Scatabo. I think if DK, they go by like stats last year, then he's going to be overpriced to start because he tore it up, But if they just see, Sac State, what? And price him at 4K, then things get interesting. But I don't want him to be too stupid cheap, because then everybody rosters him, and then it's just like, okay, we're having to beat them in every spot. And that part of it, I don't like. Logan Diggs heading to LSU from Notre Dame. Notre Dame room, it's full. Tyree's going to the slot. I think Diggs going to LSU is a smart move for him, where I'll get probably a better workload, honestly. Excuse me. And then Christian Turner goes from Wake Forest to Indiana. Aiden Robbins from UNLV to BYU, where I do think he'll continue a bell cow-esque role. You mentioned Keeley going to Mississippi State from Penn State. I think he'll get some usage. I think Keeley will become more fantasy relevant. He really fell out of favor and was just not rosterable at any point for Penn State. And obviously their running back room is so strong, there's just not going to be a spot for him. So going to Mississippi State, where he'll be able to utilize and kind of develop further as a pass catcher as well, which is a big part of that Mississippi State offense. Will change slightly, obviously. Rest in peace, my man. Elijah Collins going from Michigan State to Oklahoma State. That one is interesting to me. I do want to focus on Collins a little bit when we talk on the Big 12 show. Justin Williams-Thomas going from the Vols to Cal. Arlen Harris going from Stanford to Iowa State. That one is interesting. Kavase Smoke from Kentucky to Colorado. Talked about that one a lot. Also, A.J. Allen from Nebraska to Miami. I actually really kind of like A.J. Allen. That one's sneaky to me. And then Trevion Cooley from Louisville to Georgia Tech, where I think he'll kind of build on what we saw from him throughout the last couple of seasons. He showed flashes, gets extended carries or RB1 carries at Georgia Tech. I think Cooley will definitely be a guy that we can roster with regularity. Jalen Mitchell goes from Louisville to UConn as well. That Louisville running back room changing. And then one to really pay attention to here for action purposes, Keshawn King goes from Virginia Tech to Western Michigan. There was a bunch of transfers out of Western Michigan. I like Keshawn King. I think he can definitely do some damage in the MAC. When you look at it, let's pull this up real quick. Virginia Tech had some other guys throughout, right? So he wasn't a bell cow, but 2019, 340 yards, 2 touchdowns, 9 catches for 154 yards. That's the big one for me. 20 catches this past season for 137 yards and a touchdown. That is a big one for me. He's proven himself to be a pass catcher. In 2021, they didn't utilize him as much. He caught 2 passes for 52 yards, one of which was for a touchdown. They obviously needed to throw him the ball more out of the backfield. That's something that we see running backs in the MAC do. Going off to Western Michigan, look out, the fantasy viability, the stock, if you will not be higher on Keshawn King. I think we're looking at the premier back of the MACtion potentially because of his pass catching. We could see Sean Tyler-esque type numbers here coming from him. All right, moving right along here. Other guys. Jaron Mangum going from South Florida to Michigan State, where I think he'll get some work. Harrison Whaley goes from NIU to Wyoming. He will also get some work. And then Naquan Wright from Florida to South Florida, again, also will get some work. All right, moving right along here. By the way, Demi Sumu Karnbai is headed to Kentucky, or at least that was the word. So Kentucky continues to be a scary football team. All right, let's move on to the wide receivers here. Travis Hunter transferring from Jackson State to Colorado. He's going to be all over the place. Not probably going to be as big of a DFS option to match his personality. Adonai Mitchell from Georgia to Texas. Look out there. I think he will be a very big factor for Texas. Dante Thornton heads from Oregon to Tennessee. I'm certainly interested to see Thornton. He goes from really not that interesting to me at Oregon to really interesting to me in that Tennessee offense. Dorian Singer from Arizona to USC. That was one we harped on a lot last week. J. Michael Sturdivant from Cal to UCLA. Don Lovett transfers from Missouri to Georgia. So while they lose A.D. Mitchell, they get Don Lovett from Missouri, who was very productive last season. And they also get Ra Thomas from Mississippi State to Georgia, who has really, really solid PPR upside. And the touchdown equity in the Georgia offense, maybe not what we would love to see, but I do think Ra Thomas becomes a really good fantasy target. Looking at his stats, what he did there, 44 catches, 626 yards, 7 touchdowns last year, 18 catches, 252 yards, 5 touchdowns in his freshman season. So I really like Ra heading to Georgia. Again, the touchdown equity may not be what we would really love to see. However, that doesn't mean that he won't be a productive back or receiver. Dante Cephas goes from Kent State to Penn State. Look out, that Penn State room. Let's look at what Penn State's rocking real quick. Because Penn State is going to be awesome. From a fantasy standpoint, Penn State, they're not going to be a joke, man. Drew L.R. is going to be turned loose. We know that. At running back, they're set. They got Allen, Katron Allen, Nick Singleton. They even bring in Trey Potts. Not sure why, but they've got insurance there in Trey Potts. Potts, we saw him handle the rock for Minnesota whenever injuries happen to Mo. Harrison Wallace, Keandre Lambert-Smith. There's a lot of talk of Lambert-Smith being a breakout star in the receiver room, but Harrison Wallace, another young guy, Amari Evans and Liam Clifford, all sophomores, young guys. Malik McLean transfers in. This will be his junior year out of Florida State. He's got, upside. And then, of course, Dante Cephas, who is a total game breaker coming in from the MACtion. So Alar is going to have his look of targets. This Penn State offense is going to be pretty fun, I think. Allie Jennings transfers from Old Dominion to Virginia Tech. I like Allie Jennings, big time production last year. Somebody who I think will be somewhat sneaky. Virginia Tech doesn't get a lot of talk when it comes to fantasy circles, but he will definitely have his opportunities there. Devontae Walker transfers from Kent State, another Kent State transfer. That team, Kent State didn't win a lot of games necessarily, but the production was wild. Walker heading to North Carolina, where he's going to have the opportunity to be in a very high-powered offense. And North Carolina has to to really replace some names, right? So let's pull up their depth chart real quick, because they're going to look a little different in the receiver room. Drake May is still going to be around doing his thing, throwing touchdowns, rushing for touchdowns, doing all of that stuff. The running back room of North Carolina, Omarion Hampton back, British Brooks, healthy, knock on wood, Elijah Green, Caleb Hood. I mean, George Pettaway. It's a deep running back room. Their running back room makes SMU's running back room seem like they have no depth. At the wide receiver spots, it's going to be different. They have Andre Green. Let's see what he can do. Kobe Paysour, Gavin Blackwell. Those guys all had like mini flashes last year. Not big flashes. We're talking minuscule flashes. But they do bring in Walker, who I think is going to be a big-time weapon immediately, obviously. And then they bring in Nate McCollum from Georgia Tech, who I think has sneaky upside in this North Carolina offense. I don't know, that a lot of people necessarily paid attention to Georgia Tech last year or any time in the last couple of years. But McCollum had 655 yards last year, 60 receptions, 3 touchdowns, even gave him 6 carries, scored a touchdown on one of those 60 yards on the ground. So somebody that they wanted to get touches to and was actually a pretty decent fantasy option there for a few weeks. Didn't at any point really blow the doors off it, but is relative to his price, he produced quite well. So I like the McCollum Walker kind of thing that we got going on here for North Carolina, and obviously with Drake May, look out, right? Scary Franklin again transferring UTSA to Ole Miss. That UTSA receiver room, man, I don't think people realize just how good that room is, or was, I should say. Because they had legitimately 3 different guys in the receiver room capable of 1,000-yard receiving yards. That's absolutely insane. Pure insanity that they were able to field a team like that and have people honestly overlook them or not even really give them the hype that they deserve. Because I don't think we'll see a team with like 3 receivers putting up those kind of numbers. So I'm excited for Franklin again. Cautiously optimistic about it, though, because we've seen other names going to Ole Miss's video game-esque offense and just not producing at the level that we would have expected them to. It's a very strange thing. Keon Coleman, my man, going from Michigan State to Florida State. I love Keon Coleman. He did us right against my Huskies last year, and I think he has a ton of upside and WR1 potential. I'm not crazy about him going to Florida State. I might be one of the few who says that. I think Florida State is getting a magnificent amount of hype from people. Obviously, their Trey Benson is on every running back breakout list, and I don't even know that he should be. Like, we know how good he could be from last year. So, I mean, it's kind of trendy to call him a breakout, but people already know what to expect. They still have Lawrence Toafili, who is got a lot of touchdown equity there. They bring in Jaheim Bell to play tight end. Probably won't have to run the football anymore like he did at South Carolina, although I don't mind him doing that. I like Bell a lot. Jordan Travis will utilize his tight end, and I think Bell's going to have a pretty nice year overall. Winston Wright, Johnny Wilson, Ja'Kai Douglas, Darian Williamson, Deuce Spann, like all those guys still in the receiver room, but bringing in Keon Coleman, looking at it, he's got to be WR1. I know Johnny Wilson is there and he put up some numbers, but Keon Coleman is a stud. Tez Johnson goes to Oregon. We talked about him last week from Troy. I like Tez quite a bit. Jamari Thrash heading from Georgia State to Louisville. That's interesting. Trey Harris to Ole Miss again. I like that. Tyron Smith, who went to Texas A&M, goes back to UTEP. He's still showing in the portal, but he is a UTEP for life, and he's a big-time pass catcher. Other notable transfers, JoJo Earl, who is another guy on Bama, similar to Trey Sanders, that I was expecting to be really good really quickly. Didn't quite live up to the hype and his recruiting ranking. However, he's going to have that opportunity to go play for TCU in an offense that's riding a high from last year for sure. Jimmy Horn goes from South Florida to Colorado. We talked about him. I like this Elijah Spencer transfer from Charlotte to Minnesota. man, I really, really like the Charlotte team. Like, they should have been, let's pull this up. They should have been a lot better last year. They should have won a lot more football games last year. Unfortunately for them, they suffered injuries at quarterback and they had poor coaching. They had a lot of stuff happen. If Chris Reynolds would have been 100% healthy for the entire season, he would have definitely guided them to far more wins than 3. This team was very talented at all positions. Look at their receiving room. Elijah Spencer, 943 yards, 57 catches, 9 touchdowns. Grant DeBose, 792 yards, 64 catches, 9 touchdowns. And Victor Tucker, 41 catches, 406 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Now, Victor Tucker was the WR1 throughout the course of his career, right? I mean, he had a 639-yard season the year before that. In 2019, he had almost 1,000 yards. His freshman season, 712 yards. This guy was producing day in and day out, each and every game, but Elijah Spencer pipped him and looks like a really solid get for Minnesota if they have a quarterback and get him the ball. And we'll see what happens there. But he went from his freshman season 28, 381, and 6 to, again, 57, 943, and 9. And I don't think enough people are talking about Elijah Spencer, and they really should be. Now, Caleb Brown transfers from Ohio State to Iowa. That Iowa offense, similar to Wisconsin, they're likely going to be better offensively. They have more options. There are more intriguing pieces. We'll see. There's going to be a reputation there, obviously, just like with Wisconsin. I think we'll be able to possibly take advantage. Now, I think when people think of Iowa, they're going to look at, running backs. Caleb Johnson, a lot of people pegging him to have a nice breakout because he's kind of separated himself from the rest of that room. Cade McNamara comes in to play quarterback there. I think he'll do fine. He's obviously an upgrade. They have Nico Regani there at wide receiver. Their tight ends, Luke Lachey, Eric All, who I like. Eric All has that pre-existing continuity and chemistry playing at Michigan with Cade McNamara. Caleb Brown, again, coming in from Ohio State. And they also bring in Seth Anderson, who is another young transfer from Charleston Southern, was actually a pretty solid player overall. So we'll see what happens there with Iowa, but we won't hold our breath. Xavier Weaver from South Florida, Colorado, like that quite a bit. Malik Washington, who I like, or Northwestern. Northwestern is a team I'm going to be talking about a lot this year, to probably my detriment. But Malik Washington leaves Northwestern for Virginia. Whatever. Jalen Lane from Middle Tennessee to Virginia Tech. Don't sleep on Tech offense. I'm telling you right now, they are interesting. Lorenzo Styles goes to Ohio State from Notre Dame. That one's actually pretty intriguing. The Ohio State room is already pretty full, but we'll see what happens there. Tyrese Chambers goes from FIU to Maryland. That is a sneaky one. I feel like these older, like, grad or upperclassmen transfers don't get the same level of hype, at least initially, because there's a lot of these guys who, like, they've been seen or we know what they're about. And Tyrese Chambers is one of those guys where maybe the ceiling isn't going to be there or talked about as much, but he's just a really solid performer and a PPR guy. Like, he's going to be catching, 7-8 balls a game on average. And he's going to have several 100-yard performances in this offense. I have no doubt about that. Ryan O'Keefe. What's Ryan O'Keefe going to do at Boston College? Leaving UCF to Boston College. Here's the thing. There's no jerk store at the quarterback spot for BC. Bringing in a talent like Ryan O'Keefe's nice because he can carry the ball, he can catch it, he can run short routes, he can do a lot of different things on offense. He's playing with George Cox, who I think is a really solid tight end, but the quarterback position is going to be a problem. They have some nice running backs. Pat Garwo's back. Kyle Robichaux comes in there from Western Kentucky, and at the wide receiver spots, aside from Ryan O'Keefe, Jaden Williams is there, Joseph Griffin. There's some interesting pieces, but there's just not a lot to be excited here. So I'm feeling like O'Keefe, where it's going to be like, all this usage, all these targets, like, we got to buy stock. But I also feel like all the defenses are just going to be like, shrimp, and he's not going to be able to get open. So we'll see what happens there. Corey Crooms to Minnesota. Don't sleep on Minnesota, man. I'm excited for this Big Ten show next week. Caleb Smith goes from Virginia Tech to Notre Dame. That's pretty interesting. Caden Prather from West Virginia to Maryland. Let's talk about Maryland real quick. And then we'll wind down here and talk about the last couple of tight ends and wide receivers. But Maryland, Every year it seems like they said the first 3 or 4 games, like, oh, I gotta stack this, or I get a lot of questions like, hey, this player or this player, and that other player is almost always a Maryland guy. And Baby Tua, I think, is going to be a lot more consistent this year. Roman Hemby got to take that step forward as a true bell cow back, I hope. But you look at this receiver room, they're losing some pieces, obviously, but Sean Jones back, who has that continuity. Caden Prather and Tyrese Chambers come in, who are both going to be instantly productive and viable DFS options. And they have some other guys that maybe weren't used quite as much. And you have a tight end, Corey Deshays, who has a lot of touchdown equity in this offense. So kind of like this Maryland team, but I think that they will get the same level of hype they always get after a few ridiculous video game-esque type games, and then people will fall out of favor with them, and that's when we'll be able to strike. Jordan Tyson, my man from Colorado to ASU, love him. Gary Bryant to Oregon from USC, Treshawn Holden from Bama to Oregon, and then Corey Gamage goes from Marshall to USC or UCF. The only other one really that is kind of interesting for DFS purposes here, Deshaun Stribling going from WSU to Oklahoma State. Stribling pretty solid at WSU, so I think he'll definitely perform at LSU. All right, tight ends, just a couple here that we really want to key in on. Jaheim Bell going from South Carolina to Florida State. Clearly, I think he'll be better, as in, like, he's going to get more targets, which he definitely deserves. He won't have to run the ball like he did at South Carolina. I think for Florida State, they clearly have 2-3 backs that can handle the rock. They don't need Bell to do that. Although that doesn't mean they won't have some packages in the red zone where he won't get a carry, because clearly we've seen him do it and he can't score touchdowns down there. Seydou Traore from going to Colorado from Arkansas State, high target guy. CJ Dipray going from Maryland to Alabama. Caden Priestcorn from Memphis to Ole Miss. We kind of touched on him. Touchdown machine, converted passer. I really like Caden Priestcorn in that offense. Tight ends do pretty well for Ole Miss, so I think Priestcorn could actually be one of the best transfer tight ends from a fantasy perspective of the year. Eric All going from Michigan to Iowa. Eric Gilbert. We'll see, man. Eric Gilbert going from Georgia to Nebraska. Now, why did I pause like that? Because Eric Gilbert has pedigree, recruiting ranking, hype, always has hype. Does that hype finally die down after just, so many opportunities to perform, so much hope for this kid? I still want to see him, do damage. That first year at LSU in 8 games, 35, 402. He showed some big-time flashes. We all thought, give him a full season, 100 targets, and my God, he's going to be one of the best tight ends ever. Had to sit out, had, personal issues, had off-field stuff. I mean, whatever. Played 3 games, pretty much equated to 3 games for Georgia. Really sad that it didn't work out. Am I really, really being cautious about him? I absolutely am. I worry that it's just going to end up being one of those stories of a kid who had all the tools, all the hype, and just couldn't put it all together. We'll see what happens. And he also needs a transfer waiver, I believe. They're being pretty rigid with waivers so far. So we'll see what happens there with Gilbert, because this being his second time transferring. But we'll see what happens there. Man, I just want to see him work out. I want to see it work out for him. Feel really, really terrible if it doesn't. AJ Barner goes from Indiana to Michigan. Josh Simon goes from WKU to South Carolina. And Austin Stogner going from South Carolina to where he's liked in Oklahoma. Those are the really, fantasy, I guess, relevant tight ends at the moment. There are a couple others that we'll talk about when we get into the actual conference breakdowns, but those are just the initial ones to really kind of look at and having at least the back of your mind when we get there. All right, let's just get wrapped up here. Okay, there's one team I want to talk about I mentioned Peyton Thorne transferring to Auburn, and I wasn't sure how that would work out. I do want to harp on his weapons real quick, because this is a team that I have several in my tool chest here that are going to be like hashtag Walt sneaky teams. And I think Auburn might be one of those teams, because Peyton Thorne doesn't get the level of respect that other quarterbacks do. He has a running back room behind him, Brian Battie, who transferred to South Florida, Jarquez Hunter. Hunter is getting hyped to the moon, so a lot of focus on the running back situation there for Auburn. I'm seeing, when people tweet out like, hey, name your breakout running back, name your breakout offensive player, breakout SEC player. Jarquez Hunter's name comes up in absolute metric S time with that. But you look at this receiver room, you look at it, he's, tight end wise, Rivaldo Fairweather, who transfers from FIU, comes in. He's decent enough, but they also have Coy Moore, Javarius Johnson coming back with experience, transfer coming in, Jair Shorter from North Texas, who I really like. Give you his numbers in a second. And then Hollywood Shane Hooks, who was at Ohio, was a Maction star, goes to Jackson State to do his thing there for Neon Dion. Doesn't follow him to Colorado like you might think. Instead, goes to Auburn. Now let's look at Shane Hooks, because you may not remember him from Ohio, but he was a guy that we very rarely did not roster when it came to Maction slates. It'd be nice if this worked. All right, there it goes. All right, so 3 years in the Maction, and you're gonna look at his stats and be like, "What's so exciting about this?" He didn't have a full season really at any point, but there were certain games where he was clearly the best player on the field. 2019, 26 grabs, 515 yards, 5 touchdowns. Just a guy that is really, really good. I think that maybe people forgot about him, perhaps. But I think he's going to be good in this offense. And I kind of feel like this entire Auburn team is going to go overlooked to a degree. That's something that I feel pretty passionate about, honestly. I think that Peyton Thorne doesn't get the respect that maybe he deserves. And you might forget, let's pull up his line here. In that game against Washington, he was slinging threw for almost 3,000 yards, 19 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. The year before that, he was over 3,200 yards, 27 touchdowns, 10 picks. So he doesn't even need to be like some super gunslinger by any means. He just needs to be above average, and I think he can do that with the weapons that he has here at Auburn. So that's the team that I'm kind of looking at here with Hollywood Hooks and Jair Shorter and some of these other guys that are really quite interesting. Now, Shorter, he's another guy. You look at his stats, nothing's going to impress you on a season basis, but he's been around for a long time. He's a veteran, and he had individual games where, again, he looked like the best player on the field. And last year for North Texas, he suddenly became an absolute just fiend when it came to scoring touchdowns. 11 touchdowns for North Texas on 23 receptions. That's some pretty high freaking touchdown equity for Jair Shorter. So playing some tight end, playing some wide receiver, an interesting team here nonetheless. But at the end of the day, it's all about the Huskies, America's team. Go Washington Huskies football and basketball for that matter. We just got Paul McCahey from Rutgers. Let's go. Give it up for your dogs. All right, so setup-wise, we're still working on it. Bear with me here. I think the camera quality, way better than it's been. Way better. Sound quality, we're working on it. Obviously, the background, it almost looks like I'm in a like a hostage situation. Like I'm reading a script here, and I'm got this background here, but it works for now. Next week, I think we'll have the new banner. I'm very, very hyped for said banner. We will go in depth to all Big Ten teams from quarterback, running back, wide receiver, coaching changes, all that good stuff, breaking the conference down. The rest of this summer, we're going to be doing all the breakdowns, SEC, Big 12. We're going to be doing it all. Going to start having guests here very, very soon. And before you know it, we'll be in week 0, giving you the very best in college content. We have some new content creators on the college football side on FTN Bets, and I couldn't be more excited about the direction of FTN with everything that is happening and all the best content that we're going to be providing you. And I have been talking to my man, Mike Randall. Projections are on the way for college sports. Might not be till college basketball, but I want you to know that that is something that is in the pipeline. A lot of you have been asking for it, and it is coming. So there you have it. Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate all of you. Take a very, very pat on the back for the season that we had and the season we're about to have. And I hope that you had a great holiday, and I hope that your summer is going to continue to be great and you continue to support us. WNBA, TBT, all that stuff continues. Summer league starting, money-making opportunities. Grow that bankroll so you can hit the CFB season hard. I'll see you guys next Wednesday. Same time, same place, different background, different setup. See you guys later.